Disclaimer: this podcast is not in any way affiliated with Universal, DreamWorks, or Big Idea Entertainment. All opinions discussed belong to the person sharing their views and may not reflect on our personal beliefs. And with that, enjoy the show. Welcome back to another installment of the What's the Big Idea podcast, the podcast that interviews former associates of Big Idea Productions to talk about life before, during, and after VeggieTales. In today's special interview, we're going to be talking to a day one legend of the Big Idea mythos. While not one of the bigger names you may think of, his impact is beyond words. The voice behind the one and only Dad Asparagus is none other than Dan Anderson, a mysterious and elusive figure that could not be tracked down so easily. But thanks to the valiant efforts of MrLunch, were we able to finally find this man to give his life story, alongside his history of playing this iconic character. Without further ado, here is Dan Anderson. Thank you so much for coming onto this podcast.
I'm pleased to be here.
Who are you?
Well, my name is Dan Anderson, aka Dad Asparagus.
What can you tell us about your childhood and your upbringing?
Well, I had a wonderful childhood. My childhood spanned the 50s and into the 60s, so that was really a quite different era. We had moved out of Chicago way west in a western suburb that was very rural. As a kid, we rode our bikes everywhere, played outside, climbed on trees. I mean, we didn't have electronics yet, so it was really kind of an outdoor life in the summer. We had to create our own fun, and kind of, I think some of the creativity that I developed later came from that, having to create our own fun. Grew up on all the TV shows from the late 50s and 60s, which were very simple, but the really good writing. I think that influenced a lot of what I did. I grew up in a Christian home, strong Christian home. I had one sister. My folks were active in the church. We were active, so definitely influenced my life. I became a Christ follower at age 10 and never looked back. So that's, I guess, probably a good summary of childhood.
What sort of activities were you involved in at a very young age at your church?
Well, at a young age, I don't know how young you're talking. I mean, like in grade school, it was obviously Sunday school. We had Awana. You maybe have heard of that, which was memory and activities during the week. A little bit later in junior high, part of a junior high choir, then into high school retreats and summer activities. So pretty much anything that was going on, I was there and a part of it.
What would you say is like a great childhood story to bring out whenever people ask you about the days of your youth?
Days of my youth. Oh, let me think about that. I mean, so many. I guess one thing that I enjoyed with a friend, this was when I got a little bit older, we got into building model rockets. So I was kind of geeky from that standpoint. We'd ride our bikes to open fields, which were quite a few back then, and just had kind of fun building them and then launching them. Really bike riding. I mean, we would ride to an adventure park that was maybe 20 plus miles from our house. I think about that now on busy roads. I don't think I'd let my kids, they're older now, but I wouldn't have let them ride on it. But we just kind of had a freedom to just kind of go and run and explore. So that's kind of a general. Another thing that was a big part of our summer, we played, I wouldn't say disorganized, but unorganized baseball. Before I got into Little League, there was a field behind our house, but it ran next to a highway. So we had to play with right field closed, if anybody on this knows what that means, which was kind of a challenge. So there were maybe 10, 12 kids in our neighborhood, and we just were always coming up with things to do. From my first skateboard, I actually built from skates and a board, and we built stilts and go-karts, just always active, doing something.
Dan Anderson, the builder, possibly even engineer. Do you still have that longing to still be creating and building stuff even after all those years?
I would say, yeah, that's true. I mean, I enjoy doing stuff around the house, built a great play set for our kids and a shed. So yeah, that kind of carried through. Just like to be active. And I'm kind of jumping ahead in the story now, but because of what I do for a job, I like when I'm done working to do something that's more physical. It's just kind of, a counterpoint.
What were some of your favorite pieces of media growing up, whether it was like a TV show, movie, music, anything of that sort?
Sure. I would say probably my favorite TV show was the Dick Van Dyke Show. I think what resonated even at that age. So that came on in 1961 and went through 64 maybe. So I was 7. If I do the math right, when that came on. But even then, what resonated with me was he was a writer. I was intrigued by that, and not just a writer, but a comedy writer. To a degree, that's what I've been doing for the last 30 years. So I would say that had a really impact just on learning timing, of comedy, that would definitely be my number one show from my childhood.
What can you tell us about growing up in your middle school and high school years?
Well, let's see, middle school, I think that's where I really started to gain a love of the sciences, intrigued by chemistry and physics, even to a degree, math as much as a middle schooler could. Just starting to gain even more of a sense of independence and wanting to be able to be creative. By junior high, started to notice girls. They weren't so icky anymore and started thinking, well, maybe cooties isn't all that bad. That's for all your older listeners if they know what cooties are. So they were formative years in that point, just starting to think a little bit deeper. High school carried on through that and began writing. I had a friend, we would write spoof commercials because my dad had a tape recorder and some sound effects records. So we'd write these fun, silly commercials. And also, then the first car I bought, the engine was running on 5 out of 6 cylinders. So one day I just took it apart to find out what the problem was and was able to find the parts to fix it. So I would say high school is where I really started getting into creativity in many different fields, writing and just doing things physically. Had tons of friends. For a lot of people, they talk about high school was a difficult time. For me, it was a wonderful time, just, I guess, because I loved people and had friends from virtually every different group in the high school. Back then, we kind of broke into a few different groups. I won't go into what they were now, but I kind of liked being in a bunch of those different little groups. So thoroughly enjoyed my high school and junior high years.
What can you tell us about your parents, what jobs they were doing when you were young?
I had most wonderful parents. They were solid Christ followers and they were consistent. You know, sometimes you see people and you wonder, what are they really like at home? Well, what you saw with my folks is what they were. My dad was very kind, loving, gentle, firm. He didn't let us get away with anything, but then I didn't want to. I always wanted to please. And I think that helped truly become a Christian at age 10. So I never really went through that wild streak. It was really easy for me to want to obey my folks. He worked in an office setting for a company that provided kind of like a Michaels, if you know what Michaels is, but it was a smaller company and it was mail order back then. But his passion was music, was a choir director at our church for about 30 years. He sang in a men's group that recorded probably, gosh, I don't know, 30 albums or more. That was his passion before there was really a way to make a lot of music or money in Christian music. My mother was a nurse, so she was a great mom because she not only was a mom, but could take care of anything that came along. Two of them were a great match together, provided a great background for me and a great example for my own life and for my own marriage.
So you brought up pop culture, and so I was wondering, growing up, what pop culture figures during childhood influenced you?
It's a good question because it was really the 60s were a pretty tumultuous time. If you study it and you really put it into perspective, so much went on. I mean, 63, I believe, was it 63 or 4? I think it was 63 when President Kennedy was assassinated. I mean, that's a tremendous way for a decade to kind of start off. I mean, up until then, really, the early 60s were more had a feel of the 50s, but that was kind of a change. And then you had his brother, a candidate, I think maybe before him, it was civil rights leader was killed, Martin Luther King, and then Bobby Kennedy, and then the Vietnam War was ramping up. There was a lot of social unrest. So there were a lot of people who were influential and outspoken and with maybe new theories of way to live life. The thing that was different back then, though, is we didn't have access necessarily. So you didn't have social media where they were able to get their message to you in a much more direct way. You kind of had to go and search for them. You had to go and maybe get a book. You had to read magazines. Maybe you went to a rally. And honestly, I wasn't doing that much of that where I was out in the far-flung suburbs. Things were happening probably downtown Chicago. So I would say at that point, my influences were more Christian adults, the ones that really shaped who I was and what I was thinking. And I'm just so grateful for that because there were a lot of people at that time trying to lead you astray. There were things I know now that I didn't then, the real horrors of Vietnam. That wasn't made clear. That's more clear now. Some people were trying to make that known. So I would say as far as pop culture didn't have a huge impact on me just because it wasn't as available as now. It's now you almost can't get away from it for good or for bad. So some might say I was sheltered, but, it was out there if I wanted to learn about it. But, we were kind of in our group of friends, kind of just going through and figuring out life. What I find interesting is at the end of my high school era, if you will, when we were thinking about what are we going to do, that was when things were still kind of a little chaotic with Vietnam still going on and race relations were heating up. And yet we had a very optimistic view and we were excited to go off to college and, get a degree and get on with life. So it was interesting as I look back now, how we kind of weathered that despite the chaos, like I said, going on around us.
And speaking of college, what did you do while you were at college?
Well, I mentioned before how in junior high and high school especially was interested in chemistry. So I was a chem major and a math and business minor, which the irony there is I end up becoming a writer. But one of the reasons I like chemistry is I didn't have to do a lot of writing. And I tended to avoid classes where I had to write papers or had to write like an analysis of a poem. What I liked about chemistry and math was there was a correct answer. It was kind of black and white. But while I was there, I got involved in a lot of college productions and did some writing for that. Really knew at that time writing was something I enjoyed, but I didn't really know how to pursue that. And what I wanted to do and did do for a while was working in the pharmaceutical industry. I was a pharmaceutical sales rep for several years. That was kind of how I used my chemistry background.
What can you tell us about those years being a pharmaceutical representative?
Well, there were parts I absolutely loved and parts that I really didn't like at all. Which would you like to hear first?
Your choice.
I'll start with the positive. What I really enjoyed, and I said before how in high school, I just really loved people. I loved getting to know them and from different walks of life so that I wasn't just like reverberating within my own group of Christians or race or whatever. And that kind of translated then to the work world where taking an interest in people is really invaluable if you're going to be in sales. It has to be genuine. What I enjoyed was called on the directors of pharmacy and the head nurses, just solving their problems and helping to make sure that their needs were met. That I really enjoyed. And I would do a lot of work before I'd go on a call. This is kind of like, I guess this is business 101. I would be prepared. So I wouldn't just go in and just be a friend and not bring something of value to them. And I just found that as a great challenge and a really rewarding feeling after I'd been on a call and they were so happy I came and I was able to take care of something for them. That was the upside. The downside, my territory was pretty much Chicago and maybe the top half of Illinois. So half of my day I spent as my own taxi driver, driving from one place to the other. And in Chicago, you can't just go from, hospital A and then drive a mile to a nursing home B because you needed to make appointments. So try as I might, I didn't always have things right geographically close to each other. So I'd spend an hour and a half driving to my next appointment and then maybe 45 minutes to the next one. So that's, in Chicago traffic. And in the summer, I had to wear suits and now I'm hot because I got my wool suit on going in and out. And in the winter, you're driving in bad weather. So that was the downside of the job. Just half my day felt really kind of unproductive. Meanwhile, and maybe I'm getting ahead of the story here, and this might lead to your next question. So I'll just throw this out there and then kind of see if that's where you want to go. There was a drum beat in the back of my head that I wanted to do something a little more creative, as much as I enjoyed the challenge and the reward of working with all these professional people.
Since it seems that you've spent a lot of time in Chicago, let alone the state of Illinois, what are some good places to visit if one were to visit Illinois/Chicago?
Golly, do you have another hour? In Chicago, some of the things we enjoy the most are just walking around and seeing the architecture and the parks. And one of our fun things I would do sometimes just with one of our kids when they were maybe into junior high or high school, or would be our whole family, we would take the train down from our northern suburb. We'd get off downtown Chicago and walk out to the lakefront. I mean, there's a beautiful fountain to walk around. There are museums, there are malls, there's just walking along the lakefront with all the boats. Sometimes then catch the elevated subway, which turns into the elevated train, go up to a Cubs game. There's something new called the River Walk, which is restaurants right along the river along Chicago. There's an architectural boat ride, which is fascinating that a person can take. And if you like pizza, of course, Chicago is the best pizza in the world. So you want to take advantage of that. Plays, restaurants, it's just endless, the attractions in Chicago. If you get out a little bit further, there's a place called Starved Rock. Look it up. It's the most amazing place because it's set in the middle of Illinois, but you feel like you're almost like a little sub-Grand Canyon. So if you like to get out and hike and get out in the woods, that's available as well.
Sort of jumping the gun a little bit here. In a behind the scenes or an audio commentary, Mike Naraki and Phil Vischer mentioned that there was a Thai restaurant that they used to visit when they were writing episode 2, God Wants Me to Forgive Them. Would you happen to remember or recall that Thai restaurant that they're speaking of?
I don't know what that would have been because there's literally probably hundreds of them. I mean, we went to one that was called the Thai Star Restaurant on State Street, but they probably went to one further north up kind of in the neighborhoods where they lived. So no, I don't remember what that would be, but I could see that happening.
You mentioned that you were involved with production during college. So what were those productions that you were involved with?
So there would be every year 2 or 3 big productions that would fall on, for example, there was something in February called Snow Days. The school I went to is in Minnesota. So you can't avoid the fact that you're buried in snow for several months and it's below zero for weeks on end. So up there, they embrace it. It really is quite amazing. And so there was a weekend called Snow Days. I'll just give you a quick example of one of these. I was actually in charge of student activities that year, and we had a Christian singing group that was all lined up to come. So it was going to be a concert and it would be a date night. And there were other activities that Snow Days weekend, like a polar bear plunge into the lake when it's 10 below. But about 2 weeks before, they called and canceled, which was kind of a problem. And so I got some friends together who were also creative just to brainstorm. And we came up with the idea of emulating what was a popular show at the time called The Gong Show, where if you haven't seen it, it was kind of a precursor to America's Got Talent, where people would come out, and most of them were legitimate acts, talented acts. Some were just goofy that they just threw in for fun. But if you got gonged, then you were out. So we decided to have, we called it Snow Days Snow Biz, as in there's no business like snow business, and got some prominent people on campus, like the football quarterback and the dean of women, and I can't remember who else, a couple popular teachers who were the judges. And I contacted all of the, who was ever in charge of all the different floors and the dorms and said, we need talent and here's what we're doing. And so they would sign up and just let us know kind of what they were doing. And we talked to the food service guy and he agreed to put on, excuse me, a meal for about 500 people, which was interesting because he had never done that before. Just a fun night of first a meal and then this crazy show with college students providing the talent. Some were good, some intended to be bad. They wanted to get honked. And so it was a great community night, entertaining. That was just one example of one of the types of productions that I worked on.
Chemistry, people, writing. What the heck do you pursue in your quest for a degree?
Well, my degree was actually called Applied Science in Business because I did kind of a tailored program, adding business to what otherwise would have been more of a straight chemistry math minor. I knew that because of my interest in people, I didn't want a chemistry degree to work in a lab to discover the next or invent the next silly putty. When I would do labs in college, after being in there about an hour or 2 hours, I would start to get antsy because I knew something was going on, maybe in the coffee shop or with other, and I wasn't a part of it. I had that need for more interaction with people. So taking the business side just kind of opened the door to enable me to then go on and do something in the pharmaceutical industry.
Speaking of college, right? You tend to meet people that mean significant importance in your life. And with that being said, but how did you meet Phil and Mike?
Yeah, that's jumping ahead some years. So we got married in 1980. In 1987, we moved into Chicago, lived downtown Chicago, in fact, up on the 41st floor in a high rise, which was a great experience just in and of itself. Beautiful view of the lake and the city. Didn't really know a soul. We met somebody on our floor who introduced us to one of his friends, and she had discovered a new church startup called Park Community Church. At the time, we'd been going to an older, larger church where we knew one family, but they lived in the suburbs, so they would just come in on Sunday and then disappear. We were looking for community. So this friend, Leslie, said to Bob, our other friend, and us, said, let's go visit that church. It was meeting at a high school, Francis Parker School. So we went there and there were about 60 people. So it was kind of a small group that had started several months earlier. But they did something that to me was like riveting. It was a really a significant moment in my life. And that is they had a drama on Sunday morning. And I'd never seen that before. The church I grew up in was very, very traditional, where, hymns, choir song, announcements, prayer, sermon. But here was about a 7-minute drama to introduce the topic of the sermon. And I sat there thinking, that's something I would love to be a part of. And so fast forward, I did. I started writing dramas for the Sunday morning. Had a great experience with that in Chicago. We had really talented actors who started coming to the church that I could rely on. So I would get a topic. The ideas just kind of seemed to jump out of nowhere. And I'd check to see what actors were available and write it kind of to their skill set. And we'd have one night to rehearse, and then we'd perform it on Sunday morning. We were at a gathering, my wife and I, Nancy, and someone said, oh, you need to meet Phil Vischer, because he's going to kind of start writing as well. And he's kind of a creative guy, which was an understatement. So I met Phil, and I don't remember if Mike was there at that gathering. It may have been. And we just started chatting and found out that we were kind of kindred spirits in the way that we enjoyed writing and being creative. The difference with Phil, two differences. One, my skits or dramas were kind of more real life comedy. His were just kind of bizarre. We really had different styles in that regard, but both really successful. And his were just so much fun to watch and sometimes be a part of. The other thing that I realized a little bit later is he is one of two people that contains, or that has, a mix of abilities that's really quite astounding. And that is an extremely creative side and an ability to deal with the techie side. And that's really unusual. I mean, I kind of dabble in tech, but I'm more kind of on the creative side. And I know a lot of people who can do the tech stuff, but don't handle creative. But he did both, which was a huge part, of course, of his success. That's kind of getting ahead in the story. But when I first met him, we were instantly kind of connected. And then from that meeting, I think our wives met, and I met Lisa at that same time. And then we just started doing stuff as a couple. And as we would be out with them, he started talking about this big idea, which was a little idea at the time, of creating an animated series of limbless talking vegetables that taught and promoted biblical values. And we would just say, whatever, kind of a fun little pipe dream. So anyway, that's how we met.
Kind of backtracking a bit, what was the jobs that you got straight out of college?
Before I got into pharmaceutical sales, as I was working toward that, I worked for a manufacturing company. They made packaging equipment, and I was in the marketing department, kind of sales support and marketing, which really was an invaluable experience, not only for when I did get into pharmaceutical company, but also once I started writing, because my writing is for business settings. And just to have worked in that office and the job that I had, I dealt with people in manufacturing, people in engineering, the sales team, the marketing team, management. So really, it's so interesting how I look back and see how so much of what I did was laying down foundations and understandings that would serve well later on. It was almost like the Karate Kid, doing the wax on, the wax off. When I came to a point, it was some understanding that was so crucial, and I had already obtained it.
You brought up your wife. What can you tell us about your love story and having her by your side?
I'm about 5 years older, and I always say every anniversary, I should be sending a thank you card to my college advisor. And I'll make this quick, but there was a class I was taking. It was a high-level math class. It was taking a lot of time with the homework. And I had a friend who was in the class, and we were commiserating how this was just such a kind of a waste of time. And we had even asked our professor, what would you use this for? And he didn't have a very good answer, but it was just something to check a box. And so we said, let's check with our advisor and see if we need this class, because maybe we don't. So he went first, Dr. Stevens, great professor and great help. And he looked it over and said, no, you don't need that. And so when I showed up, he goes, oh yeah, I talked to Tim already. You don't need that. So I dropped the course. Well, what I forgot and what Dr. Stevens forgot, Tim was pre-med and I was a chem major, and I needed that class for my major. Unfortunately, it wasn't going to be available again for a whole nother year. And so to just make it short here, I ended up having to go one extra year, not as a full-time student. And then I also took some extra business classes. So I was a student a year longer, But that's the year I met my wife. And so if Dr. Stevens had remembered that I was not the same major, he would have said, you need it. I would have taken it. I would have graduated and left and never met my wife. So I should have been sending him a thank you card, as I said, for inadvertently helping me meet my wife. So we met, I think, the second week of the fall semester, met her in the coffee shop and just started talking and started dating. And by December, we were pretty sure that we were serious enough to maybe even get married, but didn't get engaged until that May, and then got married a year and a half later, roughly. College sweethearts, and been married 43 years now, and more in love now than ever. So I'm blessed, blessed, blessed.
What can you tell us about your kids?
We have 3 children. Our oldest is 31. She has our one grandchild who will be turning 1 in about 3 weeks. She's been married about, I think, 10 years. And she just has always had the love of life. She was a great first child because everything was exciting to her. We still lived down in the city at that time. By then, we had bought a townhouse up in what's called Lincoln Park. Very congested, very busy, but she loved it. She loved watching people and seeing people and them making a big fuss over a baby because you didn't see that many down there. By the time our second one came along, it was we just didn't have enough space in our townhouse. So we ended up in far-flung northern suburb where we could get a house and a yard. Our second child is a boy, Michael, and 2.5 years after that, we had our youngest. So Molly is mostly a stay-at-home mom, does some work in a coffee shop that she loves just for the people there. Michael works for the financial branch of Volkswagen in kind of quality control. And our youngest, Kate, is a hospice nurse. So it's interesting how 3 kids from the same 2 people are very different personality-wise, very different paths, but they get along well because we allow nothing else. When they're all over at the house, both our daughters are married, Michael's not. It's just a crazy, loud time, and we love it.
So forgive me if I'm kind of messing up the order of events. Were there any other jobs that you were working before you went into Park Community, or the job that you were talking about before, was that still the thing that you were doing?
Yes, at Park Community Church, I was doing the pharmaceutical sales. So right about the same year that the first VeggieTales came out, that was the year I made the switch over and started writing. I think it was that same year because it's 93, because it's been 30 years now that I've been writing. And if I remember correctly, I think it was December 93 when the first Where's God When I'm Scared came out.
Before I go on another little tangent, this is the surprise I wanted to show you because in my hand, I have one of the original 500
Yes.
copies from the very first run. Here you go. And you even have, I don't know if you could see it, but there you are featured
There we
right in
go.
that image right there.
Well, let me tell you something about the box that you're holding. So they had promised delivery for Christmas. I don't know if you've heard this story, and if you have, and if somebody else has told it, then you don't necessarily need me telling it. But it's a tribute to their fortitude, but also forging something, a new path. They had promised to deliver that first episode in time for Christmas, but just getting all the rendering done, it was a new process. They came right up to the wire. They found a place that would make those boxes for them in Chicago. They got the boxes, I think, about a day or so before they had to ship them, but they ended up having to overnight them to get them out to people who had ordered them on the 23rd, so they'd have it on the 24th. So that box that the cassette is in, that has quite a story, that it was really touch and go up until the last minute. So it's kind of a miracle that you're able to hold that box, actually.
Getting back to Park Community Church, I'm going to list off a couple of names, and then you could just tell me a quick description of them and your opinion on them. So
Okay.
We already got Phil Vischer, and I think you've mostly said Mike Naraki. If not, then you could talk about Mike Ray if you want.
Oh, Mike. Oh, yeah. He's like a big kid. You won't meet anyone friendlier and just interested in who you are and what you are. I mean, Phil too, but to a greater extent, Mike Naraki. You just, it's infectious. And when you're around him, he just makes you feel good.
Jim Poole.
Jim Poole. Jim Poole is the brother I never had. Jim was the programming director. So when I started writing, he would be the one who would call me up on, say, a Wednesday and say, a week from Sunday, the topic is XYZ. Can you write it? And I'd either say yes immediately, or I'd say, well, I'm just too busy, and I'd hang up. And then in 2 minutes, an idea would pop into my head that was just too good not to do. And I'd call him back and say, yeah, I can do it. Jim is a tremendous actor. And so I would love when he and I would be in a drama together. I'd write him into my drama. The only problem with Jim is he was heavily involved on Sunday mornings, just getting the morning together as the program director. So what happened more often than not, and I was really made me nervous at first, but then I grew to understand it. We would do our Sunday morning rehearsal. It was our only chance to rehearse on our stage. And he'd be forgetting his lines and he'd forget his entrance or his movements or whatever because he had so many other things on his mind. But once, the service started and then we did our drama, he would just nail it because he was probably one of the best actors I worked with and just a lot of fun, very creative. He did a lot of writing himself. To this day, we can go months, even a year or two without seeing each other. But when we get together, we just pick up right where we left off.
Kurt Heinecke.
Another one of the so very talented people associated with Big Idea. As you know, he was our music director before he jumped and became full-time. I'll just give you a quick idea. So there was a drama I wrote where I was a nerd who wanted to ask a girl out. So I go over to my friend's house. So he's going to help me because he's Mr. Suave, debonair. In the middle of it, there's this kind of a daydream sequence where I had like a nerdy bow tie and white shirt, but I pick up this sport coat and I put it on and I go to the middle of the stage. And before that, well, it's kind of a long story, but we see the girl that he was going to date. She was also a nerd, but she transforms, actually it was my wife, she transforms into this, like a party dress and her hair came down. We meet mid-stage and we sang a song together. But here's what was interesting about Kurt. So I write this and I go, well, I don't know if he can do this, but we needed a song that's kind of an older song from the 40s. So he said, oh, no problem. So he arranged it. He got a sax player who came in and we needed that morning. Just happened to have a harpist. We needed that for the transition. But he was so adept at whether it was country or rock or whatever, he could just arrange something and to make it work. So it wasn't surprising to me that he went on to work full-time for Big Idea and to win Dove Awards. And on top of that, just a great guy. We'd vacationed with them before. So another dear close friend.
Mike Sage.
Mike Sage, I didn't know as well, so I can't say as much, but again, just so friendly. You love being around him. That's about the best way to summarize it.
Kristen Blagan, and then the final one is going to be Gail Freeman.
Kristen was someone that I used quite often in our dramas. She was so good on stage because she would just kind of radiate out the audience, and she was full of life, full of energy. I won't go into what it was, but she and I were in probably one of my favorite ones that I wrote and was a big hit. So just bubbly and full of joy. And then what was the other? Was Gail Freeman. She was Madame Blueberry, right?
In one episode, she was, yes.
She was, yeah. So I didn't know her real well. I met her when we started recording in Nashville after the company was bought from Phil and they moved it to Nashville. So they flew me down there. And as I was approaching somebody who's holding a sign, Big Idea, who was the driver, she approached and suddenly we were both standing there, and we had no idea, I don't think, that the other was also flying in. That's when I met her. And I'll just make this a quick story because it's just one of my favorite Big Idea stories. First thing she said to the driver, I have to make my plane this afternoon because I'm in a play in Chicago and I don't have an understudy. And so we go to the studio and they recorded my part first because Dad always has minimal lines. He comes in at the beginning, says a few things, and comes in at the end to wrap it up with some nuggets of wisdom. But obviously for this one, she had a lot of lines and the time just kept running longer and longer and longer. And she was getting nervous. And they said, well, we just need to do a little more. Finally, they finished and she was like, put a blueberry in a slingshot and shoot her out. And she came flying out, ran to the car. This driver was now like Mario Andretti. I've never seen somebody driving so fast down a highway, and I could barely keep up with her running down to the gate. We got on the plane and literally within 1 minute, they closed the door. We backed up. So that was memorable because I was nervous for her and she was nervous. And someday I want to listen to that episode again and see if toward the end of the episode, her voice was maybe starting to get a little bit more tense. But that was my main experience with her, but it's just fun to be around.
Bill Vischer mentioned in the behind the scenes that oftentimes you would play the father character and it's really funny looking back because you play, of course, Dad Asparagus. Do you find anything interesting about the role that you played in a lot of those plays that you took part in the drama scene and then playing a dad character in VeggieTales?
Well, the irony, of course, is when it started, I mean, I was a dad, but my daughter was only 2 years old. So, I didn't have extensive experience as a father. And a lot of times when Phil would be directing a scene, sometimes he'd say, well, just think about it as if you're saying that to Molly, who was our 2-year-old at the time. She was younger than Junior. But I think I had had enough influence from my father and seeing fathers from my friends. So you kind of knew what a father was. And quite honestly, I think about this now, back in 87, 88, when we started to go into Park Community Church, back then I was one of the oldest people, which is weird when I think about that because I don't feel like I'm that old. So it kind of made sense that I was, I guess, more of a father figure, just being one of the older people there. It seemed to come naturally, though. And a lot of it was that they were just so well written that it was easy to just kind of fold myself into that role.
What can you tell us about you officially getting involved in the first episode and then sort of that really early space of Big Idea, let's say from like 93 to 96?
When Phil and Mike they had written this episode and they were doing the recording, I think what happened is they had this dad character, and one of them could have done the voice because they were doing many voices, but I think they were afraid it would sound like the goofy guy trying to sound serious. So they wanted someone separate and distinct. I'm sure what went through their heads, they said, well, we need someone who can read and we need someone who can work for free. And Phil probably said, Dan Anderson. And he said, I'm sure he can read because I know he can write. So I got the call from Phil and just said, hey, can you do a character? And I didn't really understand totally what he meant yet. And I don't think at that point I realized how far down the path they had gone with the production of it. So, I wasn't expecting it, but it was a pleasant surprise. Back then, their office was on a little old store front, north side of Chicago. And the recording booth was literally a broom closet in the back with moving blankets on it. And it didn't have a heater, and it was November and it was cold. So they'd run a heater in there before you went in, and then they'd turn it off. If you had a lot of lines, it would start to get kind of cold. And so that's where we recorded Where's God When I'm Scared. And back then they were kind of still figuring out how to do the recording. So Lisa, aka Junior, and I had lines together, if you'll remember it, especially at the end. So now I'm squeezed into this broom closet with this woman and calling her little mister. So that was kind of a weird moment. It was definitely fun and exciting for them to see his little idea turn into a big idea and then become a reality. So yeah, it was very, I would just say, a fun time.
In 96, little rumblings of VeggieTales is starting to catch on, but it didn't reach its climax until 98 when VeggieTales started selling, I believe, around $40-50 million a year. Just a big explosion of VeggieTales. How did you feel hearing about these little milestones of Phil Vischer's and Mike Naraki's success?
What was interesting would be to see it out in stores. That was kind of the reality. But where I mostly saw the change was when they had to keep moving to bigger offices. The recording booths became more sophisticated. There'd be more people working there and people who I had no idea what they did. I don't know if Phil had any idea what they did. Of course, I'm kidding, but that's where I saw the growth, not so much out in the marketplace, but just how the production size, because when it started, it was 3 people. It was Phil and Mike, and gosh, I can't remember the guy who did a lot of the animating. And then it grew to the point where they took over, I think it was like a JC Penney's in a mall, just had tons of people working in there. And by then it was the original series. It was 3-2-1 Penguins and Larry Boy 2D, plus working on movies. So yeah, that was astounding. But we were just so happy for Phil that he had made it happen.
I think the name of the people that you were referring to were Chris Olsen and Robert Ellis. Those were the first 2 animators besides Phil.
Correct. Thank you. Yes. Mm-hmm.
But now, after 98 is when VeggieTales starts gradually declining and whatnot. During that time period, before the bankruptcy officially happens and talks of lawsuits, did you sense any changes with Phil Vischer and how he carried himself from the previous years or something like that?
Not really. Phil is kind of a private person. Like many people, wasn't real comfortable with one-on-one talking to people. I mean, I think it was different for me and for my wife because we had gotten to know them pretty well, but he was not one to necessarily express feelings. And I think he probably held a lot of stuff in. And so we didn't really know. We did hear at the premiere of Jonah which was fun because that was all VeggieTales people, big idea people at the premiere. So, somebody who animated a gate, they'd get a cheer when their gate appeared. But at that, Lisa told us that the next week they were laying off a lot of people. So that was our first inkling that things were kind of slowing down. And I think they had kind of overextended. And honestly, Phil had relied on people he brought in. I don't know if he's given you this story, but this is my sense. He was relying on people who maybe didn't quite understand the vision, and they were taking things a little too fast, a little too far. So things had to shrink a little for that to catch up, especially the sales of Jonah the movie. I don't think they got the revenue they were hoping from it being in the theater. So they were relying on it coming from the sales of the DVDs, but that was going to be a lag. So yeah, right around there, things kind of started to shrink, and we were starting to see that.
What was it like when the news was official? Big idea, they lost the lawsuit, general feelings about that?
Well, knowing Phil and Lisa so much and how their dream was so pure at the beginning, he did he want to make money? Of course. He always wanted to make an animated series. He always wanted to make then a Christian animated series. He was always interested in that. And that was his foremost dream. And to see that kind of evaporating and then losing it, it was heartbreaking to see. Beyond the bankruptcy and the money, I know that was hard, but to see your baby kind of slip away, yeah, it was very heart-wrenching to see.
Then you hear big idea gets picked up and whatnot. They move down to Nashville, Tennessee, but they still want you to do the voice of Dad Asparagus. I think you described a little bit of how it sort of changed during those later years. What was the transition like between Chicago all the way down to Nashville?
Well, from my perspective, sure, it was just really a change in location. And it kind of amazed me that they went to the expense of flying me down for a day for, it took sometimes maybe a half hour to record. Because like I said, Dad's part was an important dimension, but it certainly wasn't insignificant. But then in the later years, you're probably aware of this, through emergence of more technology, I was able to go to Wheaton, which is a Chicago suburb, and record there. And so the people who were directing it would be a part of it via Zoom rather than me going down in person. And that made a lot of sense. So it was, I thought, well, that's a big expense, but this is to fly me down there. But, that's show business.
What would you say was your favorite Dad Asparagus line and also just a favorite Dad Asparagus moment?
I guess probably the Dad Asparagus line was from Jonah, where the car goes out of control and one by one you see things flying, that we're flying into. So the line was tree, cabin, underwear. I'm sure those are words that will live in infamy.
They certainly are living rent-free in my head right now, just as you said that. What was your favorite episode?
Well, the first one has such a sweetness to it, and maybe because it was the first one, that might be the number one. Probably the Fib from Outer Space. I always liked that one. I thought that was a lot in it that was really good. So that might be number two if I have to rank them. And you already mentioned Madame Blueberry. That was so clever, and the animation stepped up from there. And I actually had an older woman, when I say older, probably this was maybe a decade ago, and she was, gosh, I don't know, 80. She had seen it and actually said that had an effect on her because she'd been holding on to a lot of stuff. And I don't know, it kind of spoke to her. And I thought, wow, that's interesting that here's a quote unquote kids animated series that was having an effect on adults as well. So Madame Blueberry, I think, also is near and dear.
Forgive me if this turns out to be incorrect, but reading on some of the stuff that you did at Big Idea, it said that you did a recording for a VeggieTales album called A Very Veggie Easter. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, I think I was a vicar in that.
Was there anything different when it came to recording from an episode to an album, or was it just pretty much more of the same except singing, I guess?
More of the same. Yeah, I don't remember that it was really any different. The process would be the same. I'd get a script sometimes ahead of time, not always, because what I had to do was not that challenging. So it was the same either way. I'd get a script ahead of time and go into the recording studio, and then either Phil or somebody else would direct it. So really made no difference whether, how it was animated or whether it wasn't animated. The one thing that I always wanted, because I was in a few songs, I always say, please let me have the song ahead of time. It'd be nice to be able to learn the melody ahead of time. Yeah, it was the same process.
It said that your last credited role for VeggieTales was in 2012. Did you remember it kind of feeling like the last thing, or was it just that they gave it to you, here's just another dad role, and then it just kind of stopped showing up, calling you to voice sessions?
Yeah, definitely the latter. That wasn't a big surprise to me that they would want to start using somebody local down in Nashville, because that was kind of a hassle where, like I said, I would go to a studio in Wheaton, record there. The fun thing with that is generally I would bump into Lisa, who was junior, because we didn't see each other that often, but it would be a chance to sit and chat briefly before either I went into the studio or she did. I had no idea it was the last one, but I didn't have like a bittersweet moment, but it wasn't that big a deal, to be honest.
Bringing up Lisa, I have to bring up the episode The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, because that was a very junior and had a lot of dad portions to it. In fact, I'll tell you right away, that ending scene actually made me cry when I was 7 years old. I kid you not. Do you remember anything particular about that one?
Well, I'll tell you this. I don't know how many people have their favorite parable in the Bible and have a favorite verse in the Bible and even have a favorite word in the Bible. And all of those are in that episode, because my favorite parable is the wayward son. Favorite verse, I believe it's Luke, can't remember the reference now, like 15:20, I think. And that's where the father looks up and sees the son returning. And it says he ran to the son. So that's really the Christmas story or the Easter story, where the son coming back is, really mankind in repentance, and the father running is reaching out to us. Even at that point, he didn't know that the son was coming to apologize. Maybe he was just coming back for more clothes or whatever, but he had such great love for his son and missed him and wanted that relationship that he ran to him before he even knew why he was coming back. And that's God pursuing us even while we're sinners. That to me has always been so touching. So that's my favorite parable, favorite verse, where he runs, and my favorite word is ran. It's just, God ran. It's very dynamic. So for me to be able to be part of the animation of my favorite parable is very significant. And that's what I think of with that episode.
As the series went on and the budget started increasing, I would imagine that you got compensated quite nicely. I don't know if it's like tied by like red tape or that you can't explicitly say how much you made, but at least describe, was it a decent chunk of change that you were getting for voicing Dad?
Well, it's funny because at first they didn't pay anything, and that was fine with me because it was just a fun thing to do. I never expected or even wanted to be paid. After maybe 3 or 4 episodes, Phil said, "Oh, I have to pay you." I said, "Well, whatever, it doesn't matter." He says, "No, the lawyers say I have to pay you because otherwise you might come and sue me later," which, that was a joke here. He was a great friend, as if that's going to happen. We both kind of chuckled about it, but it was studio time. I don't even remember how much it was, an hourly studio time, and it never changed from that. And that was fine with me. It was just the fun of doing it and being part of something that was so well received. I mean, to this day, I'm amazed some of the people I run into who were aware of it, just different walks of life and even different religions. We have friends, they're Jewish, and they are aware of it, and their kids watch them. And I just thought, wow, that's amazing that this had such an impact across so many different strata in life. And to be a part of it was its own reward.
So during the time when Jonah was released, the DVDs of the episodes released, and in the behind the scenes feature of Where's Gunner, I'm Scared, they show footage of you recording as Dad Asparagus. When was the first time you were noticed in public as Dad Asparagus?
Well, I would say I was never noticed because I don't know how many people would have watched that, or if they did, would have recognized me from that. I would say really never, that's fine with me. What's interesting is we'll meet people and get to know them and be friends, maybe even for a year or longer, and then they discover that I did the voice, something that, depending how old they are, they may have grown up with, or they certainly, their kids did. And that's a funny moment because it's very unexpected, almost, disbelief at first, right? For actors who are like stage or movies, that would be kind of a curse to be noticed and known. I think it's just been fun to be a voice actor.
Now, we previously left off your personal working career by saying that you transitioned to being a writer. What was all the stuff that led you to become a writer, and what were some of the things that you worked on?
I would say, again, one of the biggest things that affected that change was when I started writing the church dramas. That's kind of an interesting story because the dramas at church, like I said, were about 7-8 minutes. And the purpose was to introduce the topic of the sermon, not to give the answer or the solution, but just a quick introduction. So I've been writing those for maybe 4 years, I'm trying to remember. And people always say, those are really fun. They're really good. You ought to do that for a living. But I'd always say, yeah, like, I don't even know where to begin. Who needs a 7-minute script that's just an overview? So I'll kind of jump ahead, but I found a production company. This was a business production company that would put on a little presentation in a trade show setting. So imagine, you got your trade show booth and you got people in the aisle, and they would put on this presentation that would attract people, get them to sit down. And it was 7 minutes to 8 minutes, and it would just be a high overview of what was going on in this booth. And they wanted it more often than not to have a kind of a humorous angle or a clever angle. And they were looking for writers. Well, it really was quite amazing and definitely a God thing, because that's exactly what I'd been doing for those 4 years. And it really enabled me to make that transition so easily to start writing for them. Quite often you hear people who give back to the church based on what their job is. For me, it went the other way around. What I'd been doing for the church and volunteering turned into a career for me. And that company that I started writing for as a freelance writer, not as a full-time employee, but I still write for them to this day, 30 years later.
What are some of the cool projects that you've been hired to write for?
Well, the trade show, they're a lot of fun. Now, those have kind of died out a little bit, but they were fun productions where it might emulate a game show or a TV show using characters, like Big Bang Theory, a couple of those characters who actors would then imitate. Those were very gratifying, fun to write, part of a production team that included a lot of times the marketing people from the company or a vice president. And they're just so excited about it. It's something different for them. And to be on that creative team working with that company, every one of those projects was a lot of fun. There's another company for about 15 years. I've written their opening presentation video for their sales meeting. We do a lot of fun creative stuff. They have a big budget for that. And in fact, I'm working on one of those right now. Every year, that's kind of the highlight, just to brainstorm that, to come put it together, to write it, and sometimes to be a part of filming it. It's living in the business world, but on the fun side of it, which is kind of unusual. And I'm really blessed that way.
According to IMDb, it says you worked on 100 Center Street, Deja Vu, and a few PBS kids show. Is this true, or you've been misidentified?
Well, the PBS thing I don't think is accurate. There was something I did, I don't remember if it was Jump Street, but there was a production where I was a pastor who got shot. The story of a real incident. It was really, the story was about the wife, but they'll cut to black and white and kind of have reenactment. That might have been what that Jump Street is. I can't remember. The greatest part about that is, so I get shot and I fall down kind of some stairs, and they show me on the ground with blood coming out of my mouth, but it was actually Hershey syrup. And because it was in black and white, it actually looked pretty convincing. But I enjoyed that because it was about 2 or 3 takes, and I got to get a shot of Hershey's chocolate syrup every time, which is one of my favorites. I think those others are in error. Some of the other things I've done, and this is totally unrelated to VeggieTales, when you're in Chicago, it's real easy to do work as an extra. They call it background, they call it. So I got to do a fun thing for Empire. If you're familiar with Empire, the TV series, it was about a recording studio where I played an FBI agent and got to be part of a big raid where we come crashing into the Empire studio and tearing things apart. A couple other scenes that were kind of fun to do. So that'd be the only other thing that was kind of media related.
You bring up Empire, which reminds me of another VeggieTales connection. Episode 2 had Jeff Morrow, who played Palmy the Palm Tree, if you remember. He actually was the voice producer on Empire. Did you ever run into him by any chance?
No. I wasn't even aware of that. What I did was in Chicago during production. That sounds like he was maybe more involved in post-production. I'm not sure. But no, I wasn't aware of that. That's interesting.
One more question that I guess I could include on the podcast just as a nice closer. But what is the main thing that you want people to get out of who you are as a person and all the stuff that you worked on? Well,
first and foremost, Christ follower. That's, if there's one important thing that we can do in this life is answer the question, who is Jesus? That's especially significant. We are sitting down for this recording, tomorrow being Easter. I'm glad I discovered that at a young age. And as I grew older, kept reaffirming that as new areas of life develop, as you grow older from just being a kid, but in each one of those steps, the relevance of following biblical principles and commitment to God just continue to be important. And I can't think of anything more significant about who I am. I love doing creative things, and anything I do, all that's because of any gifts that God has given me. So that would be my main takeaway.
I'd like to thank MrLunch for once again tracking down Dan Anderson for this amazing interview. And like always, special thanks to the big man himself for agreeing to be interviewed. Until next time, we'll see you guys on the next What's the Big Idea podcast.